Before I begin this review, I wanted to give some general disclosure about my interactions with Purpleheart Armoury. I don't believe it impacts anything about this kind of mini review or my thoughts on their products at all, but for the purposes of full disclosure, I did want to mention it. Now, this sword, which is a synthetic training saber, specifically kind of like a Polish saber, is one that I purchased from them. So when I'm speaking to that, I'm speaking about a product that I purchased. Pretty much every other product I'm going to talk about in this review was loaned to me by Purpleheart Armoury so I could practice with them, give them to some of the people in my club to practice with, and also just get used to using them so I could give some feedback on my thoughts on the products. The only exception to that are these two items, which are both sickles. These were actually donated to my club by Purpleheart Armoury. Again, I do not believe that impacts my ability to speak to the quality of their products, but I did want to actually provide that in terms of full disclosure in case you feel like that somehow compromises my ability to give these reviews. So again, these synthetic sickles are donated to my respective HEMA club by Purpleheart Armoury. The first item I'd like to talk about is this synthetic saber. So I actually got this because I really wanted to get out there and practice a bit more with Polish saber techniques, and I have a Polish saber. It is a sharp, so I wanted something that was a little bit safer for me to use, as well as something that I could potentially take to my HEMA class and spar against other people with. Now, I'm alone in this. I only have this right now. I haven't had a chance to really break it in just in kind of the pure Polish saber mindset, but I have actually pitted it against some of the other synthetic weapons that I'll be talking about, specifically the macers, and we tried some general macer, saber, Dosac style fighting, just to kind of mess around and get used to using these. I'm actually really happy with this, although I will say that shortly after I purchased this and started using it actually in the class at Long Point with Matt Easton, I realized that having the curved saber didn't work so well for what he was teaching because I really needed a straight saber. That's all right. I got used to it. The weight here is not too bad. It's actually pretty light. One of the things to note about synthetics in general is they don't actually tend to match exactly the weight of an actual sword. So you do suffer a bit in trying to understand the actual weight and balance. However, in general, the balance is about where you may expect it to be on these type of weapons, which is good. Purpleheart does a really good job on trying to find a good medium by which you can get an approximation of the weapon that you're actually testing with, and I was very, very happy with this saber. Of all the synthetic weapons that we messed around with in my club, this is probably the one that I enjoyed the most, and probably the feedback from my club was the most stark. We actually did Meyer sickle fighting, so we looked at the sources of Paulus Hector Meyer, and we looked at some of the translations on the Lichtenauer, and then we started kind of going through that process. And we watched some videos and modified our process and just kind of messed around. The one thing that we all kind of agreed on just in general for sickles is they're terrifying. The idea of having a sickle come around the back of your neck kind of puts chills up your spine. And I will say, for the purposes of synthetics, I can't think of a better weapon to actually have as a synthetic. I don't know that I'd really ever want to do anything with a steel sickle. There's just something about that kind of makes me shiver. And this is such a good approximation of how it may grip and how you would use it that you don't really necessarily need the real thing. And this is probably one of the few cases where I'll actually say that, because my general thoughts on synthetic weapons is that it's always better to have steel, although it may not always be affordable. These are that good balance point because you're getting an affordable item, as well as you're getting a chance to actually go in and do something that you may not want to do with something that approximates a very real sickle. That said, again, it was a lot of fun working with these, and they held up extremely well. The teeth on this are designed to give a little bit of a grip, so when you have two of these and they catch, they don't really shift one way or the other, except for with great force. That's kind of meant to recreate the idea of a sharp on sharp and those edges kind of sticking a bit. In retrospect, I think that this is probably not my favorite. I would probably rather have the smooth because I don't think that it's all that necessary, at least in what we tested, to have the teeth. However, if you feel like that is better for you, then you have those two options. You have it nice and smooth on the inside, and you have it with the teeth. Either way, they're completely usable, and I think they'd be a great addition to anyone's club in terms of kind of opening up the horizons of what you may be testing and what you may be doing in terms of just general HEMA practice. So I was actually really fond of these, and I'm actually very appreciative to Purpleheart Armoury for donating them to my club. Purpleheart actually let us borrow 2 different types of macers to play around with. This is a Krieg macer, which is a very large 2-handed macer, and then we had this one, the regular single-handed macer. And we spent a good bit of time going through some macer resources, and we also looked at something like Polish saber fighting because there are some general crossovers, and we played around with kind of mixtures of these. So we would take the macer and put it against the Krieg macer, we would take the Polish saber and we put it against the regular macer, Polish saber against Krieg macer, etc., trying out different combinations. Now, I will say that in general, because the sources we were looking at were not specific to the Krieg macer, this was not incredibly useful for us. In fact, we kept putting it down. It was just a little bit too big. Some of the mule nades that you try to do with a single-handed weapon didn't work so well because of the length of the crossguard. I think that's more an indicator we were using the wrong tool for the job. Go figure. So when you took those same principles and you applied it to a standard macer, it worked just fine. I actually think these performed very well. Generally, one of the problems with a synthetic, and we saw it certainly when working with a macer, is that it bounces a bit, a lot more than you would have with steel. Steel is better at absorbing the shock and not kind of ricocheting off, and so when you're trying to kind of go into a bind, very often it bounces and then it kind of confuses and messes up the play that you're trying to do. So that was a little bit problematic. However, we got over that fairly quickly. General note for people who've never used a synthetic before, my own personal opinion is they work a lot better at slow and moderate speeds, not at anything going fast or full-on sparring. So they're really good for kind of working through sources, historical sources, and working through plays and understanding the mechanics well before you ever go into a full-on fight. Now, they do work for that. You can take a synthetic and go and have a sparring match with full gear on. It'll work just fine, although I feel like you begin to lose out on the real experience and maybe sometimes even the proper expectations of what it should feel like when you go full on in a fight. So I always find that synthetics work very well just for general slow practice. In fact, most of the videos you will see is us doing exactly that. There were a few times we went a little bit faster and such, but generally speaking, I like going slow with synthetics because they hold up fairly well and they don't whip around too much. And in these cases, even though these are they're flexible but not super flexible, they will still bend over a lot of stress in fast play. And so we just kind of use it at a moderate speed, and it works really well. In fact, I think our favorite to do was actually taking the macer and put it against the Polish saber, because they're about the same length. If I were to hold up the Polish saber, it is a good bit longer actually, but for the purposes of the plays, it worked better than trying to go up against the Krieg macer, which is actually just about as long as the Polish saber, but because of the length of the hilt, it didn't quite work as well. So going that one-handed route worked very well for us in the club, and I think we actually really enjoyed going through that process, even if it was just on a temporary basis. So I think that these macers are actually really good products to pick up if you're wanting to kind of test the waters of these type of things. And honestly, that's what I think about most synthetics, is that they are a good, roughly inexpensive way to beef up your armory for HEMA, as it were, and actually try out these different things. So these were very good products to that end. The last 2 items that my club got to mess around with were these 2 Dosacs. Now, generally speaking, when we were doing practicing with Dosacs, we were actually using something very similar to Polish saber, to a macer. So what we were practicing was not actually all that different, although you're much closer range because it's a much shorter sword. My thoughts on this particular Dosac design from Purpleheart Armoury is that they actually have better products for Dosac fighting. and for the general practice. My opinion is these are the most inexpensive versions you can pick up from Purpleheart. They're the most basic, and in my opinion, that's actually a drawback because the other offerings they have actually probably work a little bit better. What you'll find, and it's going to be loud, but there's kind of this weird reverberation and bounce that happens with these. I think it's partially because of the width of the blade, but also because it's so short. A lot of times with synthetics, the longer the blade is, the more that the bounce can actually turn into just regular flex that you would actually kind of want to have. But these don't really flex all that much, especially that way. Now this way they flex a good bit. But of course, across the actual edge point, they don't really at all. So there's this huge kind of reverberation and bouncing. And I was not a huge fan of that. Now, one advantage that these do have is that the hand guard here is actually reversible. So it has a little key ring you can actually, and we actually did, they gave us a left hand and a right hand version, but no one in our club actually is left-handed, so we actually swapped it out, which actually makes this from a utilitarian standpoint very, very nice because you can swap it out for the individual's own personal preference. These weren't bad. I enjoyed using them, but I definitely think that Purpleheart Armoury's other offerings are actually probably better, especially since we have good sources on Dosac fighting, and you very quickly want to get up to the point where you're actually going at it at a fairly decent speed, and that's where it doesn't translate so well. My own personal opinion, I really like the leather-bound ones where they use a core that's actually made to give some flex and actually squish a bit, but it's got this kind of nice leather covering to it and works very well. They do have different types. You can ask them about their different products for the Dosac. But these were actually all right just in general, but I don't think I'd go for them over all the other options. Overall, on synthetic weapons, my opinion again really just comes down to they're really good as a way of kind of minimally or on a very inexpensively increasing your armory, right? Purpleheart has a really interesting thing. I'm going to reach over and grab these sickles. They have a really interesting thing that I noticed while I was actually there. I pulled up their website to look at all their potential offerings at Long Point, and while I was talking to Christian about his products, actually shortly before we did the video interview, he actually made mention, I noted that you can actually buy a club version of these. What I mean is, you will buy in a single package 4 of these, and I don't remember if it comes at a discounted price, but you can go ahead and just buy the quantity you might need for a club. So if your club is like, oh, we should really go do sickle fighting, there's actually a package for that, and you just go buy it, and then you have 4 sickles to go practice with. I think it's actually really cool, and I'd honestly like to see them kind of do something similar, although I don't know if they are right now, where they actually might give discounts for clubs buying multiples. So that's actually going to be my own advice to them. I hope they take it, because it's actually a lot of fun to kind of say, okay, we've been doing longsword for a while, we've been doing dagger fighting for a while, we've been doing sword and buckler for a while. Let's actually do something that's not typical. Let's go do Dosac fighting. Let's go do sickle fighting. There's so many different opportunities and a wealth of different martial art forms, as it were, different weapon types that can be used in HEMA, and synthetics are just a great way to go. Now, whether or not it's Purpleheart, there are other synthetic weapon makers. I find Purpleheart's very reliable. I have purchased from them before, not just what I purchased here with this Saber, but I have purchased other synthetics from them, specifically longswords. And I find that I do like synthetics for the purpose of just quickly ramping up that armory and trying things out. And I think that was the most exciting thing I saw in interacting with Purpleheart at Long Point and beginning to look at their websites. They offer a lot of different options and a lot of different things you can mess around with. And so when you're looking at all these products, when you're looking at these Dosacs, you're looking at the sickles, the macers, the Krieg macers, or even just a basic saber, keep in mind that you can buy almost all of these different weapons in a decent sized quantity for almost the cost of a single good Vader. Now, you're talking about a good steel weapon, and I would highly suggest everyone go get a good steel weapon if you're doing HEMA, right? Get a good steel blunt. You need that. You're going to need that. But if you're looking to expand, synthetics are a great, inexpensive way to go, because you can try it out and you can decide if that's something you really want to go for. You know, it's possible that you could go spend hundreds of dollars to get a really nice, blunt saber to go practice with, and then you find out, I don't really enjoy this. I really enjoy longsword more, and I just want to spend more time doing longsword. Well, now you're out a couple $100. Maybe you can sell that sword within the HEMA community, but honestly, if you're like me, you just kind of feel out. But if you get a synthetic and then you don't enjoy that specific combat style, well, then you're not out too much money, and you have something you can loan people who might have an interest in something like that. It's very much how I view synthetics. One final note that I will have on synthetics, and this applies to pretty much every synthetic that Purpleheart offers, as well as other synthetic companies, is the way the crossguard works on synthetics. And that is, there's an inversing of the blade width to the crossguard width. What I mean by that is a longsword will have a thinner blade width, and not width this way, but depth, I guess is the best way to put it, and it goes into the crossguard, which is wider. But synthetics actually invert that. You have a very thick blade with a very thin crossguard that goes through it. The problem that actually creates is the concepts of geometry when you're actually fighting, especially with hand guards, because very often you'll end up having the blade hit your hand when realistically the other way around it may not actually do that. And so that is a distinct disadvantage. Again, yet another reason why I feel like synthetics work a lot better for learning at slower to moderate speeds as you work through a text, as you work through a play, and you're not having to expend the edge of a good blunt weapon or blunt steel weapon, as well as you're not having to spend the money on one for something you haven't quite really learned and are ready to take to like an actual fight yet. So that's my thought on synthetics. It's a little bit rambly. It's a partial review. I actually like all these products. I think my least favorite is actually the Dosac. My most favorite was actually ended up being the Sickle, because I think they work really well just as synthetics. More than any of these, I think the synthetics alone work well for everything across the board. You wouldn't ever need a steel to get the feeling of what it would be like to fight with a Sickle. But I definitely enjoyed a lot messing with the Macer and the Polish Saber, and kind of spending time working through those sources with some of my friends at my club, and it's overall a very good time. I think that was some of the most fun we had, was just breaking out of the monotony, as it were, of the things we've been working on, and actually just playing around a bit and learning some new things that are completely new to us. So synthetic weapons, really great. Purpleheart Armoury, I want to thank them for actually loaning me these things for quite a few weeks and letting me play around with them and gather my thoughts on them. I do think, I hope unbiasedly here, that they are a great company. My interactions with Christian were great. Both he and his wife put a lot of effort into their business and making sure they give to the HEMA community something that is of value and isn't just there to kind of fill their own pockets. I wish them the best of luck in building their company and bringing us wonderful products. And I hope that everyone that is viewing this will at least take a look at what they have to offer. Even if you don't go buy it, just understand what's out there and see if it's something that you might like. Again, I will note, for the purposes of disclosure, these two sickles were donated to me, not to me, to my club, by Purpleheart Armoury, and I'm very appreciative of that. I wanted to make sure again that I note that, just in case anyone had any questions about my ability to be objective. Everything else that I have shown here, with the exception of my own purchased Saber, will be going back to Purpleheart Armoury at the end of this video, so I'll be shipping it all back to them. Hope this was at least some good insight and you got to see some of these products and of course see them in action. Thank you so much, and see you next time at the next review.